Davide Soliani isn't just your typical Nintendo fan. In fact, 15 years ago, upon finding out that the legendary game designer Shigeru Miyamoto was about to make a rare visit to Italy to promote a new Zelda game, well, he knew he had to meet him in person. So determined was he and a group of friends that they rang hotels throughout the city Miyamoto was visiting, claiming to be his Italian translators, until finally they found out where he was staying. They raced over to the hotel and proceeded to wait for hours in the cold and in the rain, and it didn't matter one bit that Soliani was suffering from a fever at the time. This was the man that had made him want to create video games in the first place. He had to meet him face to face and express his gratitude. For the creator of Mario and Zelda, this may have been a quick photo and a few autographs, but for Soliani, it was an incredibly important moment. Even then, he dreamt of one day working alongside Miyamoto, who, in his eyes, was quite simply the greatest game developer in the world. That very same year, in fact, Soliani started work on a side project with a colleague, a Game Boy Advance demo for Wind Waker, in the hopes that Nintendo might want to outsource a handheld version of their game. This idea was eventually shut down by his bosses at Ubisoft, but Soliani's desire to work on a core Nintendo franchise remained. And eventually, more than a decade later, he would get his shot. Having recently been promoted to creative director at Ubisoft Milan, Soliani was tasked with brainstorming a new game that could revitalize the Rabbids brand. The party games were no longer selling like they used to, and so it needed to be something fresh, and if the idea was strong enough, there might even be an opportunity to collaborate with Nintendo. Those, unsurprisingly, were the only words that Soliani needed to hear. He eagerly started putting together a team. And that's where he encountered his first problem, actually. Ubisoft Milan at this point in time was going all out on Ghost Recon Wildlands and could barely spare any additional resources. This meant Soliani was left with just a handful of designers, a tiny workspace, and not a single programmer with which to start work on his dream game. And so they did what they could with what they had. Soliani and his team began creating a paper prototype. They used action figures, dice, and rulers. Once it was up and running, they started inviting other people from the studio into their tiny room to play it for themselves, with Soliani and the other designers acting as the game's dungeon masters. It was through this process that the early designs started to take shape. Players weren't that crazy about the wide range of hit percentages they were being offered when firing a weapon, and so that got simplified. And on top of this, there was a feeling that the combat really was quite similar to other turn-based strategy titles out there already, like XCOM. And so, the game's inventive movement system with its dashes and its team jumps, well, that got fleshed out. After a few more weeks of testing and tweaking, it became increasingly apparent that the team needed at least someone on board that could actually write code, and so they hired a junior programmer who'd previously worked for a motor company in the same city, and well, he had little to no experience working in video games. Boy, was he in for a shock, because that very same week, Ubisoft's management gave the team the go-ahead. In fact, they'd even been so impressed by the paper prototypes, they'd gone as far as setting up a meeting between Soliani and Shigeru Miyamoto in just 3.5 weeks' time. Things were about to start moving real fast. Despite having just a single programmer, and an inexperienced one at that, the team decided they would need a fully playable demo. If they were about to convince the man that made Mario that they could be trusted with his work, well, there was no room for half measures. Putting the rest of their lives temporarily on hold, the group created a short multiplayer demo that pitted two players against one another as they controlled Mario, Luigi, and a variety of Rabbids. I'm told the artists spent much of their time recreating Mario and Luigi in particular. They compared their work with previous Nintendo games in real time, checked animation frame by frame on YouTube, and searched frantically for any design documentation they could find anywhere. I've actually seen that demo for myself and unfortunately can't share any gameplay footage, but what I will say is the attention to detail, particularly on those character designs, was remarkable. How they managed that in just 3.5 weeks, I don't know. The meeting itself was a short one as Soliani presented the demo, half shaking as he sat next to Miyamoto, and while Nintendo hadn't expected a playable demo, especially not in that kind of time frame, nor had they really envisioned Mario holding a gun, but something else surprised them too. "How did you recreate Mario and Luigi like this?" asked Miyamoto. "Well, we did them ourselves," responded Soliani, "just for this meeting." Miyamoto then took a moment to look at this rather nervous Italian man sitting next to him and said, "I'm impressed." Soliani was invited to present once again, this time in Kyoto, in a few months' time. He returned to his team in Milan, barely able to comprehend what had just happened, and broke the good news. Nintendo seemed to like what we're doing. And then the bad news. That means we're going to need a new, bigger, better prototype. And we've got about 3 months to get this one done. Ubisoft, encouraged by this news, finally shifted a few more developers over to the Rabbids project, although even at its height, there were only around 14 people working on this second prototype, and some of those were having to split their attention between this work and Ghost Recon. The workload once again was incredibly intense, so intense in fact that at one point Soliani admitted himself into hospital, fearing he was about to have a heart attack. Once he explained that he'd been staying up until the early hours every day for such a long stretch now working, the doctors said, stop it, you're overdoing it, calm down, relax. And happy to hear that there was nothing wrong with him, he went straight back to the office. The team prepared what was essentially a full level of the game called Luigi Rescue, mixing exploration and combat over several stages before ending with a boss fight. Alongside this, there were a series of dojo levels used to demonstrate each of the game's mechanics, from taking cover to team jumping to the combat itself. You've got to remember there'd never been a turn-based tactical Mario game before, and once again, this small group of developers was absolutely desperate to exceed expectations. Once the 3 months were up, Soliani flew to Kyoto to give the single most important presentation of his career. And this time it's not just in front of Miyamoto either, there's a whole boardroom full of Nintendo Japan's top brass to impress. And to make matters worse, he was exhausted. The previous night, instead of going to sleep, Soliani and his producer had gone to pay homage to the original Nintendo headquarters instead. I mean, of course he did. This is the man that pretended to be Miyamoto's translator in order to get a photograph, after all. The presentation took up almost the entire day as Soliani gave his final impassioned pitch for a game that was now called Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. The only break arrived in the form of lunch, which incredibly is signalled by the Mario theme playing throughout the building. They then played the Zelda theme to let everyone know when it's over. Seriously. After 7 hours of presenting due to the amount of gameplay and required translation, Soliani thanks everyone for listening and awaits their verdict. Everything has led to this moment. The room then remained silent for something like 2 full minutes, which may not sound like a lot, but for an exuberant Italian man like Davide Soliani, it was torture. Noticing his discomfort, Miyamoto told him not to worry and explained that the group was simply taking its time to think and collect any thoughts before speaking. Finally, they do put him out of his misery. The game looks great, like Captain Toad, but even more over the top, and actually more than anything else, Soliani and his team had done something here that Nintendo themselves could not. Not only was this a genre that Mario hadn't been involved with before, but also the interactions between him and the Rabbids offered something fresh, a different type of humour that benefited from the inclusion of both franchises, not just one. You see, it wouldn't have been enough for him to have just pitched a good Mario game here. I think Nintendo has plenty of experience already making good Mario games, they don't really need anyone else's help with that. No, the secret to Soliani's success was bringing something brand new that they hadn't considered before, and something that Nintendo couldn't do on their own. Also, I mean, if we're completely honest, he seems like quite a difficult man to dislike. That probably will have helped too.
ダビデさんが一生懸命ものすごく一生懸命説明してくれて、その一生懸命さにも結構惚れ込んで、これなんとかなるから考えましょうというふうに即その場で決まりました。
In fact, what this story has made me think about more than anything else really is the E3 2017 reveal for Mario Rabbids. Yes, of course, I'm talking about the one where Davide Soliani is seen in the audience in tears, spawning the hashtag Don't Cry Ubisoft Man, which feels a tad heartless on our behalf now that we know all the details of this story, doesn't it? Of course he was crying. What a journey his team went through to get to that very moment. Cry as much as you like, Davide, you deserve it. And you, my friend, deserve a thank you for watching all of this video. It took quite a while to put together, so yeah, appreciate it. Cheers. I should say thank you to Davide Soliani for telling us his story. I really like his game as well, which helps. And one big final thank you to Annie from our design team for all her amazing work on the illustrations and animation in this week's episode. Yeah, she's way too good to be working on a video like this. Please don't tell her. Cool. If you haven't seen this show before, it sort of airs every 2 weeks-ish, and here are the last couple of episodes. This one up here involves me taking a brain supplement and gets real weird, so I'd recommend that one if you haven't seen it already. Cool. See you next time, and goodbye.